All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What's the Big Idea? We are here with Valter Longo. Valter, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Valter, we're very excited to have you here. We've already got our Healthy Habit crew ready to go with intermittent fasting for March. You are one of the most highly regarded experts in the field. And so, why don't we just go ahead and start and tell me a little bit more about number one, where are you in the world currently, and what are you spending the most of your time working on?
Yeah, so I'm at USC, University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and particularly in the Andrews Gerontology Center, which is one of the oldest, probably the oldest comprehensive center to study aging. It was started here in the 60s. And then there was a big building built in the 70s, which is remarkable because back then it was just a crazy field, right? To think about studying aging was nothing to do with how we view it today. And then I spent another part of my year in Milan running a lab on molecular oncology, so focusing on cancer research. Yeah, so then here is mostly aging research, going anywhere from simple system to mice to human clinical trials and epidemiological studies. And in Italy is mostly cancer with the same range.
Very cool. So, and if you could help us kind of what's the through line between gerontology, oncology, and intermittent fasting, which many people know you for?
Yes, so I think that of course there is a prevention and there is a treatment part, right? So at the prevention level, cancer is very closely associated with the aging. So very few people that are young get cancer, and nearly 50% of people will get cancer in their lifetime, and the older you get, and the more likely you are to get cancer. So at the prevention level, they just aging and cancer go together for obvious reasons. DNA damage, cellular damage, immune system becoming weaker, etc. From and then we moved also to the treatment. How do you treat cancer with intermittent fasting? So at the level of aging, calorie restriction is an all story, and we can talk about it later if you want. But um, in the aging field is a very old story. It's like what happens if you just eat less calories, right? And but eventually this moved into what happens if instead of eating less calories, you eat the calories or in addition to, or instead of, you eat the calories within a certain period of time every day. Or what happens if you periodically you don't eat calories and the rest of the time you eat normal. So yeah, so then all of those control aging in different ways, and probably the main reason is that every organism that you can think of, from bacteria all the way to humans, they face a different nutrition food conditions, let's say, right? And so based on the food condition, they make a decision: do I move forward, do I grow, do I reproduce, do I do everything that I want to do, or do I stand by because there is no food to do everything that I need to do? I stand by and wait, and in that process, I try to age as slowly as possible. And yeah, so that's how the all different kinds of starvations and restrictions come in. They're giving the body a fundamental message about what strategy to take. And that's why they can be very effective in your favor or very effective against you, depending on who does it and how you do it.
Very cool. Well, then why don't we just go ahead and start foundationally with an introductory description of what is intermittent fasting?
Yeah, the intermittent fasting means absolutely nothing. I don't even know why people use it. It's like saying intermittent eating, right? What is intermittent eating? Well, it's the way people eat.
Not all the
Uh,
time, hopefully.
yeah. So intermittent fasting is the opposite of intermittent eating. So it means absolutely nothing. But I mean, what a lot of people think it means is that you extend the nightly period where you don't eat at all, right? So let's say that normally the normal diet could be eat within 12 hours and fast within 12 hours. and then you extend it to the fasting part to 14 hours, 16 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours. That's probably the most popular version of intermittent fasting. And then there are other versions where you don't eat for, let's say, 1 or 2 days a week, something called 5-2. And then there is, what we like to focus on, which is what if you just have every 3 months a period of a fasting mimicking diet. You don't even fast, and you use an FMD to achieve the effects that you may achieve with these daily interventions. Yeah.
Very cool. And so you talked about FMDs, fasting mimicking diets, and I definitely want to get a little bit more into that. But so what is happening in the body when we are fasting or elongating that period of time that we're not ingesting food?
Yeah, so it depends how long you go for, right? So if you go, let's say, less than 24 hours, not much, but you're starting to see what's called ketone bodies going up. You're starting to see the glucose going down. So that's the classic fasting glucose, right? That you do in the morning. So after 12, 13, 14 hours, it goes down a little bit, but not very much, right? So most people will have a fasting glucose above 90, let's say, right? So there's a lot of sugar still going around. Then as you extend that, especially after 2 or 3 days, then you're starting to see the ketone bodies go way up, right? And then you start seeing the glycogen, the reserves of glucose in the liver being depleted, and the fat now, in mostly the abdominal fat, the reservoir, is, we tap into it to begin using fatty acids and additional ketone bodies for fuel, right? So the brain will start using ketone bodies, the heart and all the organs will start using either fatty acid or ketone bodies to operate. Yeah, so that's and around 4 or 5 days, probably we're starting to see the autophagy, the breakdown process. That so it takes about at least 3 days for that to begin to happen. So essentially, the human body begins to shrink, right? And very slowly, and first using fat, and then eventually use and some muscle, and then eventually, if you go weeks and weeks without food, they start to use more and more muscle as a font of energy.
Cool. And so when you talked about the, let's call it like the 14-8 or the, you know, uh, 16-8, sorry, kind of like fasting schedule, and that you see minimal ramifications on the body. Like, in your opinion, like, what are the most effective for achieving some of those benefits of elevating ketones, of increasing kind of, utilization of fatty acids? Like, what is the optimal schedule that you would recommend for people who are looking to experiment with this type of diet?
Yeah, so after 30 years working on this, and having been a student of Roy Walford, who 30 years ago was the world leading expert on nutrition and longevity, I would say, the fasting mimicking diet, right? So periodic use of a fasting mimicking diet, and that's the best way to go. In addition to 12 hours of fasting and 12 hours, so I would go 12-12 and not 16-8, and we can talk about why. So yeah, 12-12 every day. We can go to 13. For cancer patient, we go to 14. But that's about it, right? So, and then yeah, maybe once, say diabetes patient, we just finished several clinical trials. Once a month FMD, and then normal people maybe once every 3 to 4 months the FMD for 5 days, and yeah, and then 12-12, yeah, 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of feeding per day.
Got it. And so, and explain. So, when you say 12-12, does that qualify as a fasting mimicking diet, or you're saying that there's something where you
No,
would do it
no.
in a long? No, no, no. Yeah. So,
12,
so
12 has got nothing to do with the fasting making diet. Is intermittent fasting. It's like the
okay,
minimum. So if you look at the work of Sachin Panda and others, you have to, if you take say Americans that eat for 15 hours a day, and you bring it down to 12 hours, you're starting to see lots of benefits, right? 11 to 12 hours, right, of eating, right? So, and of fasting. So then I will argue that that's probably the safest and best way to go, rather than go more than 13 hours of fasting every day, right? And for lots of different reasons. And but then, because you need to reach the ketogenesis, the autophagy, and the shrinking and the re-expansion, which we've shown in a lot of papers to be at the center of.
And Walter, so on this show, the one thing we like to do is when we're using terms like this, just for listeners so that they can really grasp what you're talking about, can you quickly just give an introduction to ketogenesis and ontology so that people who are listening for the first time understand what that means while you're kind of going a little deeper into the benefits?
Yeah. So yeah, ketogenesis means what I said earlier, which is the fat breaks down, and one of the products of fat breakdown is ketone bodies, right? So this, so when ketone bodies are produced, and as I said, it takes, they begin to raise after a short fast, but then they go way up after, let's say, 3 days of fasting, and that's ketogenesis. And then autophagy just means self-eat, right? The translation is self-eat. So the
Got it.
body, as it doesn't get any food from the outside, it begins to eat itself, right? And now what we have shown is that this process seems to be selective, right? So it seems the body seems to go after most damaged components first, and leave alone
Interesting.
the good components. And then,
Sure.
but the most important part is not really the breakdown. The most important part, we think, and now we've been publishing on this for 20 years, is the re-expansion, right? So the re-expansion part is where it very clearly mice, and now we're starting to get the same similar evidence in beginning in human clinical trials. In the re-expansion, the body uses embryonic developmental like processes to rebuild, right? So if you shrunk an organ, now, for example, in old studies, semi-starvation studies that they were allowed to be done in the 60s, they showed that the heart can shrink by 41% in I forgot however many weeks of semi-starvation diet in humans, right? So now imagine now 41% smaller, and then in the 20 weeks following, they showed that the heart is going back to the normal size. So in these 20 weeks, how do you go from a much smaller heart to a normal size heart? Some of it is expansion of cells, right? But probably a lot of it is generating new cells and new tissues. Now, we don't know for sure for the heart, but certainly for a lot of different organs, we know that, right? So then, yeah, then if you, when you do say 16 hours, you're not going to get any shrinking at all. The body has lots of nutrients coming from everywhere, so it's not worried about that. After 3 or 4 days, it begins that process. After 10 days, it goes even further. But now, after 10 days, you're starting to get, maybe problems in addition to solutions. And so that's why, we have to be very careful and not just looking at the benefits, but also looking at what could go wrong or what could be a side effects of going too long, let's say, with the fasting.
Very cool. And so, this runs contrary to, I think, popular wisdom that a lot of the people that we talked to prior to getting on the show with you today understand about intermittent fasting. It's a lot of what we had heard before this is, again, it's
Understand or don't.
Don't. Well, that's why we're talking to you, Valter, is to get some much deeper wisdom on the topic. So
no, I don't know, but certainly I can tell you that I spent my first project was on starving bacteria. My second project, UCLA in 1992, was on starving people with Walford. My third project was on starving yeast. Right, so I have to say that I do have. I sort of grew up in this world of starvation and aging, right? And yeah, so then that's something that people should consider. Then you can listen to whoever you want to listen to.
yeah, I mean, it's helpful for me because I was just doing a longer fasting period just for the first time yesterday, and I was an hour before my fast period was up, and I was getting ready for a 2-hour coaching call, and so I actually decided, I was like, well, I feel tired. I don't want to deal with that right now, so I'm going to eat an hour early. And now you're telling me that that's actually okay. So this is working out for me right now. And so you'd recommended some of the periods that you would recommend for intermittent fasting, starting with 12-12 as a baseline. And then tell me a little more about the differences. You had gone over kind of ketogenesis and the benefits obviously there. And so tell me a little more about what the differentiator is between a fasting mimicking diet and how that differentiates from intermittent fasting.
I mean, first of all, the fasting mimicking diet, if you look at history, every 50 years or so, there is a big explosion of fasting. And then the medical community turns against it, and then it goes away, right? And that's going to happen again unless we look at the medical standards, right? FDA and all of that. It doesn't necessarily need to include the FDA approval, but it should have that kind of a standard, right? So yeah, the fasting mimicking diet is about standardizing it in a way, even though it's food, even though it's plant-based food, can you standardize it so that every clinic and hospital and any group in the world that does research can test it exactly the same way? And there's many versions of the fasting mimicking diet. But what is a fasting mimicking diet? Essentially, at least in our hands, and we're the ones who came up with it, is a plant-based, low sugar, low protein, a normal level, let's say mid-level of carbohydrate, high fat nutritional program, let's say, that is designed where every ingredient, so because we spend a long time investigating how each ingredient interacts with genes and cellular processes, we sort of fool the system in a way that you are eating, but the system responds by not exiting the fasting response, right? Like if you were water only fasting. So, for example, proteins and certain amino acids give the order to cells to exit the fasting response. And so do sugar, right? So sugars, protein, and particularly certain amino acids are giving the message to the human body, don't stay in the fasting response because we have food coming in. And so there is no reason to stay in the fasting response. Fats don't give that message, right? So then we, on top of that, we make it really good fat. So we sort of united the let's say centenarian, the longevity, what I call the longevity diet, with the fasting mimicking properties, right? And we wanted to have an extremely healthy fasting mimicking diet, so that not only the body now has a 5-day opportunity to get into a full fasting response, but as a 5-day education on vegan diets, right? So you got 5 days on like sort of pure, really good food that is going to make sure that the body interacts with the best ingredients that we know of, right? So yeah, that's what a fasting mimicking diet is.
And when you're following a fasting mimicking diet, which I'm just repeating what I heard there, is again, it's kind of amplifying fats and avoiding some of the proteins and sugars to like stay in that fasting response. What is the eating schedule that you are prescribing or recommending to people?
Well, I mean, I wrote a book on this, and I don't even own the book. My foundation owns it, so I don't make a penny out of it. And it's called the Longevity Diet. So I recommend that people read the book, and so it talks about the fasting mimicking diet and how to do it, and also has a link to the clinic, the Create Cures nonprofit foundation clinic in Santa Monica that can follow people, telemedicine or live. And so I think it's very important to have a sort of an expert at least once in a while following you and so telling you how to do it. But other than that, I think the fasting mimicking diet comes in a package, and I don't make a penny out of that. I donate everything to charity. So but I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, it should be standardized. It should be always the same. And I give you an example. Just went to the FDA recently to test this for hormone therapy in cancer, breast cancer. And I think there are about 60 ingredients in the fasting mimicking diet. And the FDA said, if you want to proceed with the clinical trials on the fasting mimicking diet and cancer, you got to go from 60 to 7, right? And the reason for that is that
Sorry, 60 to 7 what?
60 ingredients to 7 ingredients, right? Just 7 ingredients. So now it becomes like a drug. So then and only then we allow you to move forward testing this for breast cancer. Why? Because it has to be so standardized that you have to guarantee that every time it will be identical. And so then we say, no, okay, for regular people we don't want to do that. We want to give them a normal diet. So the diet will be like bars that contain nuts and different tree nuts in the morning. It will have tea. Then it will have a soup, a vegetable soups in noon, and then it will have another snack. Healthy snack that respects the fasting mimicking property, and then dinner there's another soup at night, right? So that's the average uh, day of fasting mimicking food that is contained in the box.
Very cool. And so as we go back to kind of intermittent fasting, like our focus for this conversation, you had talked about kind of those foundational schedules that you can look at 12-12, 14-6, or 14-8, et cetera. I'm curious, like for people who are even considering intermittent fasting and trying it out to see kind of how it feels for them and some of the longer term benefits, what are the potential health ramifications that people should be knowledgeable of, or who is this right for, who is it not right for?
Yeah, the benefits, I mean, at least if you go to, let's say, 12 or 13 hours of fasting per day, um, you get lots of benefits, clinically proven, and no problems,
And
right?
like what benefits are we talking about there?
We're talking about, improved, potentially improved insulin sensitivity. We're talking about weight loss. We're talking about, maybe a potentially IGF-1 being reduced. We're talking about sleeping better. Yeah, so those are some of the benefits that come just with the, let's say, 12, 13 hours of fasting. As you go longer, you can get more benefits. You can get more weight loss. You can get even more benefits. But then you're starting to see the problems. For example, gallstone formation, and gallbladder operations. And then you see the people that skip breakfast consistently in meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a study of all studies done. Breakfast skippers have increased overall mortality, increased cardiovascular disease, increased cardiovascular mortality, right? Increase, not decrease. That's not a good sign, right? When you see that, then you want to say, okay, I definitely don't want to skip breakfast, but even if I skip dinner and I do 16 hours, is that a good idea? I think it is only if you're trying to achieve something short term. Say you do it for 3 months, and you lose a lot of weight, and then you then adopt something else like longevity diet, fasting mimicking diet, which I recommend. Then I think it's fine, right? You have an acute period, you achieve a certain goal quickly, then you move to something that is not associated with problems in the long run.
And some of those short-term goals, I would imagine, like frequently are things like weight loss, right? Or like if you have diabetes, like something related to insulin sensitivity would be like an
It's
example
the
of like short.
only. It could be something else, right? It could be that. I mean, there are papers out there claiming all kinds of benefits for 16 hours. So it could be something else, better sleep. And so, yeah, you could do that for a few months and then get to, okay, I see an improvement. And now go back to, let's say, 12 hours or 13 hours of fasting every day. And then use the fasting making diet, the longevity diet, or whatever else it is that somebody wants to do to maintain those effects. Yeah.
Very cool. And typically, like, what is, if you were going to try intermittent fasting, is there a recommended period of experimentation to actually potentially see how it responds to your body? As we look at things like weight loss, energy, sleep. If you were just looking at, say, hey, I want to try this, and you were going to start with, whether it's 12-12, 14-8, whatever that might be, is there a minimum amount of time that is recommended to implement this where you could actually see the benefits?
Well, first of all, the 12-12 should be for the rest of your life.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, not an
So,
experiment.
so it should be as soon as possible and for the rest of your life. Again, I've never seen, and I never got any of my colleagues saying, "Oh, I found a study that shows negative effects for 12 and 12." Okay, so then that's a good one. As you extend it, I think that um, again, if you do it for 3 months, whether it works or not, then stop. Right? If you want to do it for 3 months, if it worked, stop. And if it didn't work, stop. Right? So then there's your answer. Right? So if you want to do 16 hours, try it and see if it gets you benefits, and whether it does or not. After 3 months, go to something else, and then maybe 3 years down the road you could do it again. I don't see any reason that once in a while they could not be repeated, but you definitely don't want to do yo-yo, right? You don't want to lose weight and get benefits, then get back to and then use it every 3 years to get back. This
Want
is,
to find something
we have four
consistent.
clinics, foundation clinics in Italy and the United States. And usually it takes us about 2 years to get somebody converted, right? So with lots of drugs and, let's say diabetes, hypertension, to get somebody back into full health, it takes about 2 years. So it's a slow process, and we make sure we say you gotta get there, and that's it. You're gonna stay there, and we're gonna make sure you stay there. And the success rate is pretty high, right? So, but that's why it's very important to have the dietitian, the nutritionist that follows you, and it's probably the best to enter a program. But yeah, if somebody wants to do it on their own, fine. But yeah, I would do it 3 months, whether it works or not. Stop, going to something else, and uh, and then um, and then keep that. Yeah.
Very cool. And as we're looking at this, I'm curious. Some of the questions that have come up from the people who are in our cohort that are going to be implementing this are really around the differences that intermittent fasting in general, might have on male versus female bodies. And so, are there differences that people who are participating in male bodies and female bodies should be aware of before they dive into a pretty significant, or even semi-significant change in their diet?
Well, with the fasting mimicking diet, we haven't seen it. We tested in clinical trials both males and females. I don't remember Sachin Panda talking too much about differences, big differences. So yeah, so in the initial trials, we haven't seen big differences, but I'm sure there are, and I'm sure it's not just male and female. It's also different people for different reasons. So yeah, the personalization is going to be key. Thus far, I have not heard a discussion about, well, female should do this versus male should do that, right? Also, because we're talking about very fundamental responses, right? Going from bacteria all the way to humans in different ways and for different reasons. But I'm saying the response to starvation is a very ancient one, going back billions of years. And so it's not surprising that you wouldn't see very big differences. But I think you're going to see way more difference between two people that start from very different places, maybe genetically, than you're going to see from a female to a male.
Yeah, it's like I always want doctors on here to synthesize kind of wisdom that's generalized, but obviously it's very hard to prescribe a one size fits all diet or health plan if you don't know anything about the actual person. So I totally understand that. And with that in mind, I mean, are there any sort of, we had talked about male female bodies, but as it relates to intermittent fasting, are there any sorts of health conditions or dispositions that should be considered when considering intermittent fasting, whether that is obesity, diabetes, any sort of overarching or wide-reaching health conditions that deserve to be considered into trying intermittent fasting?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, 12, 13 hours, no. As you go to, let's say, 14, 13 hours and above, then if you have gallstones, that might end you up in a surgery room, or if you have family history of gallstones, and then I think. Again, I don't recommend it. So I don't want to, I think there's probably a long list of reasons why you shouldn't, say, cardiovascular risk factors already
Yeah.
being up, knowing that the 16-hour skipping breakfast strategy is associated with the increase, about a 25% increased mortality overall, and 25% increase development of cardiovascular disease. Yeah, then I definitely don't want to. I think almost everybody should be very worried about, and in fact, everybody should be worried about 16 hours if it involves skipping breakfast. If it
Yeah.
doesn't involve skip breakfast and it's skipping dinner, um, then we just don't know. But it's certainly playing with a unknown field. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is happening there, especially for people who are skipping breakfast? Like, why such a steep decline?
Well, just several papers just published, and the skipping breakfast. So, for example, one paper showed both of these clinical studies showed that if you started eating the same food, but if you ate the same food, but you started at noon instead of 8 a.m., you had a reduced energy expenditure. So you burn less fuel essentially, and you were more hungry. So there's probably signals that have to do with circadian clocks that are making you more hungry, and they're telling your body burn less energy. And we know, for example, this from also the fasting literature. So if you take people and you keep them on a strict diet, and this could also happen with the 16, we don't know, but certainly it will make sense that it happens with the 16-8 eventually. And this is a New England Journal of Medicine from 20 years ago. Your body, if it's pushed to the limit, calorie restriction, say severe calorie restriction, it metabolically slows down. So what it enters a thrifty mode. So it enters a mode to basically prevent starvation dependent death, right? But that's a problem, because now it slows down metabolism compared to your newly acquired body weight. So you say you lose weight, but it slows down metabolism further than your weight loss percentage, right? So they say you lose 10% of body weight and slows down metabolism by 15% or 20%. And now you got a problem, because now you have to eat so much less than before to keep the weight that you gained. And now your lean body mass, and this is a new clinical trial we just finished, your lean body mass start going down, right? So now you really get into a very problematic situation where your lean body mass is going down, and you struggle to keep the weight down, and eventually you're going to be so hungry that you're going to have to eat your way back to normal lean body mass and normal weight. And most of people overshoot, right? So, and this has also been shown, then you're going to gain more weight than even you had originally, right? um yeah, so it's a little complicated, but this is why I tell people, don't improvise, because you think you got a solution, because you, in a couple months after, things are improving, and you may not at all, right? And or your surprise could come 15 years on the road.
Very cool. Yeah, this is really valuable, Walter. I really appreciate this, and I think that we've taken thousands of people through these habit cohorts now, and I think it's just looking at, sure, certainly we're approaching this as experimentation and trying new things, but it's nice to hear you talk about this and ultimately the importance of doing something in such a way that you can continue doing it in perpetuity, right? Not just as an experiment or a one-time thing, especially if it could have the kind of long-lasting ramifications on metabolism and lean body mass like you're talking about. So that's really interesting. I'm curious, you had just talked about kind of some of the historical precedents and instances of fasting throughout history. So I'm curious if you could just tell us a little more about, like, where does this wisdom come from? If you look back historically, religiously, what are some of the foundations of fasting in modern society?
Yeah. So I think that the wisdom, of course, comes from our the history of all organisms, and obviously people started looking at this thousands of years ago, and not recently. So you'll see quotes from the Greek times about fasting and about food as medicine. So they make sense that even 3,000 years ago, that we would start looking at food and fasting as potential solution to problems. And then you also see it in the in animals. So like emperor penguins, the grizzly bears, or emperor penguins, every year they gain a lot of weight, and then they go a couple months with no food at all, right? So just the observation of lots of different animals that have these periods in which they stop eating, and they use the body fat, and that's normal, right? But of course, in modern society now, you have the accumulation of fat, which is part of our normal cycles, life history cycles. And you have the accumulation of fat, let's say in the summer, or all year round, and the fasting period never comes around, and that's where the insulin resistance, the diabetes, the metabolic syndrome come in, right? So for humans, yes, of course, it's not surprising that church and religions figured it out thousands of years ago. The Christians used to have a black fast, right? Up to about 800 years ago. and the black fast was about 8 weeks of calorie restriction, ending during Easter with a week of fasting. And of course, that went away, and now we kept the Friday, right? The Friday not eating meat, or so. Yeah. So then the Muslims, of course, have Ramadan, and almost every religion has a some type of fasting, because they, of course, probably observe and study the behavior of people, and realize that those that were fasting once in a while, they were doing better. Now, again, in the old days, the goal was to make it to 60 years. 65 was already a big achievement, right? You can make it 65. You, Now we're talking 110, maybe 115, right? So we talk to our patients, we're like, even cancer patients, we tell them, we got to get you to 110. And maybe we succeed and maybe we don't, but certainly that's a goal. And we see that less than 110 is a failure. Yeah, so then how do you get to 110 healthy and not frail? Yeah, so fasting has to be done exactly in a precise way so that you can get there.
Very cool. Well, I think I want to close with some more of a deep dive into your work as it relates to longevity, which I'm super fascinated by. I'd be remiss not to ask you some questions about that for sure. And then when you talked about the FMD diet, you talked about some of the specific things that you prescribed eating while on that. I'm curious for intermittent fasting as it relates to your schedule. Obviously, you've talked about the benefits of keeping 3 meals a day. I'm curious if there's a cadence where people obviously have different goals for this type of diet. Some people may be doing caloric restriction to lose weight. Some people may be doing it because they want better sleep or they want increased energy and focus. And so I'm curious, like, is there anything that you would prescribe in terms of which one of those meals you would potentially amplify in terms of caloric intake, protein? Is there a better time or a better meal to prioritize as your big one? Is it best to think about it evenly across meals throughout the day? Or like, what is the timing amongst those? If you have your eating window, how should you potentially like think about spacing out your food intake?
Yeah, so again, it's personalized, right? So for those now, 72% of Americans are overweight or obese, right? So
Wow.
for that 72%, which is almost everybody, is and Europeans are not that far behind. I think Europeans are about 50, right? So I mean, when I go to Italy, you say, "Oh, the
We
Americans."
win.
No, it's not the Americans. Now children in America and overweight is about the same in the U.S.
Yeah.
and Italy, right?
Yeah.
So the portion, right? So I would say if somebody starts in that domain, I actually recommend skipping lunch, right? And that's the only one that I think it makes it safe, and maybe having a snack either for lunch or by 5 p.m. just to make sure. Yeah. So then for the overweight obese group, we recommend or those that are borderline, let's say their BMI is a body mass index 24 and a half, and they're about to move into that, they're gaining weight. Yeah, so go into a lunch skipping mode. It's very difficult to handle it for the first couple months, and then you get used to it, and your body rewires to understand. Skipping lunch is okay. So I skip lunch, for example, and I've been doing it for 20 years, and and I think that, but I don't skip lunch on the weekend, right? So then I skip lunch Monday through Friday, and I wanted to make sure I minimize any malnourishment issue. I also want to make sure that the body understands both modality, and
Yeah.
just to really almost remove any risk that this may cause, although we have no evidence for any risk. And to me, and a lot of people that, of course, we recommend it to, works very, very well. Again, it's a little bit of a struggle for the first couple months, but then you get used to it, and then it's usually a very good way to control weight. Now, if you add the weekend to it, that makes it easier to control the weight, and if you don't, it makes it a little bit harder. But it's still a slow process. It doesn't mean it works for everybody, but it works, right? So but that's for people that are overweight or obese. For everybody else, I think lunch is perfectly fine, and breakfast you gotta have, I think, at least about 400 calories for breakfast. And I would say that within this, the best is what works for you, right? So you gotta have breakfast, right? But different people, different breakfast, different sizes, right? But let's say 400 calories minimum seems to be, qualifying you as having breakfast and not a breakfast skipper. And then, again, lunch. If some people say there's no way I can skip lunch, and some people say, hey, if I can skip lunch, it's very easy to me, right? That's much better than whatever minimum advantage you get by skipping dinner versus skipping lunch. And so I say, don't skip anything if you don't need. But if you are in that category of weight gain or overweight and obese, skip the lunch, have maybe a healthy snack at 4 or 5 p.m., and then have a normal dinner. And that, to me, is the easiest for me. But lots of people say, no, I'd rather have lunch. And it seems from lots of studies that the lighter dinner, like lots of centenarians that we follow, they tend to have lighter dinner, right? So that maybe is better for sleep. And to me, doesn't matter because there's no way I'm skipping dinner. And so to me, since it would be such a burden and it's such a social, and I don't even consider it. And I will only consider it if it made me develop some disease or some real, like if I started not sleeping and then I realized it was because of the dinner, I would try to move it forward a little bit. Like, say I eat at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., I will move it earlier. And if that didn't work, then I will consider skipping dinner. But other than that, I think it's very, very important. That's what we see in the clinics, is just that the person is happy with whatever they came up with, right? Yeah. So matching the happiness with the efficacy, I think it's what you that's what you have to look for.
Cool. And then for people who perhaps are, if you're restricting calories in some way, or like I feel like oftentimes fasting is associated with weight as like a weight loss technique, is oftentimes I think how it's socialized. I'm curious, like, are there ways for people to do this who might have like more like ectomorphic bodies or like consistently skinny and like not trying to lose weight to do this? Or is that something that's not generally recommended?
You mean for the people that are already low weight?
Thin, yeah, who are low weight. Because we
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
a little bit more about people who are obese and overweight, but how about on the other side of the spectrum?
Yeah, on the other side of the spectrum, I mean, as long as you're above, let's say, BMI 20, then you could do it. Of course, if somebody is, let's say, a male is BMI 21, I would not. I would eat 3 plus 1, 3 meals. I would make sure that I don't go lower, right? So whatever it is that you have to do, stay with the 20.5. Don't go lower. Although it's very unusual for males to be at that BMI, but yeah. So, and then below that, you shouldn't do any fasting, right? Male and female, unless there is a specific medical reason to do it. So we do it with cancer patients, for example, but we also exclude cancer patients that are usually below BMI 20 and sometimes below BMI 19. So yeah, so then there's a lot of reasons for thin people to see a nutritionist, see a physician, and say, here's what I want to do and why. Have a discussion why you need to do that. Sometimes, if we feel like somebody really needs to do something, like cancer patient or somebody with autoimmunity, then we make them gain weight with healthy fats. So we give them a healthy, so they eat whatever they eat plus additional healthy fat supplement, olive oil, nuts, etc. And we get them to gain some weight like that, and then they can do fasting-mimicking diet, or in the case of what you're asking, like more frequent intermittent fasting, and that would bring them back to where they came from, but at least they wouldn't go past that minimum threshold.
Wonderful. Um, awesome. So we've gone over some of the foundations of what intermittent fasting is, what fasting mimicking diets are, the benefits, what's happening in the body, who should do it, health ramifications, things to consider. And so I'm curious, Valter, you spend so much of your time deep in the research and the biology, what's happening when we shift our diet habits in this way. And I'm curious, it's so much of our diet habits are not intellectual, right? They're emotional. And so as a physician, I'm curious, like you focused so much of your life on how people can implement healthier dieting, healthier habits into their life. And so, how do you, as a doctor, think about how people can most effectively implement new behaviors that are benefiting their health, changing their diet? How do you speak to that more emotional kind of side of people, which is so essential in truly behavior change?
Yes. So, and I think this goes back to what we just discussed a second ago, which you have to be happy, right? You have to be happy with whatever it is that we tell you to do. So when the patient comes to the clinic, the foundation clinic, it's about, well, what do you like, right? So we always start with what would be your ideal diet, and what are the things that you cannot give up, right? So we recommend a pescatarian diet, fish plus vegan. But if somebody comes in and say, "There's no way I'm giving up steaks," we tell them that's okay. Try to, can you go with one steak a week? And if they say, "Yeah, I'll be happy with that," okay, then now we found a compromise that makes the person happy, and it's okay. This is not gonna greatly shorten your life, probably because you have one steak a week. Yeah, so then I think it's a matter of me as least the least invasive, as low invasive as possible, right? And so that you change the minimum and you get the maximum effects. And this is why the fasting mimicking diet, we and many clinicians now, thousands of clinicians, are so happy with, because they basically say, instead of telling somebody, uh, so I'll give you an experimental example, right? So we took mice, and we took mice that are on a high calorie, high fat diet, and they become big, right? Or we gave them exactly the same diet, but once a month for 5 days, we gave them the fasting mimicking diet. And it's just, we published this last year in Nature Metabolism, and it's just really unbelievable how they live as the same as the regular mice and the regular diet. Cholesterol comes back down, weight comes back down. So now you're thinking, of course, I'm not going to tell people to have a terrible diet and then do the fasting mimicking diet, but I'm also not going to not tell people that cannot give up the high fat. That, like, okay, well, if that's all you could do, then at least take 5 days, maybe not once a month. Can you do every 2 months? Can you do every 3 months? And do that. And yeah, so I think that's what we do. That's we like try to personalize to that person. And of course, this is a lot more than obesity and overweight. This is about cancer. It's about Alzheimer. Now we know that your chance of developing Alzheimer doubles, almost doubles in a diabetic patient. So it's about diabetes, about cardiovascular disease, about cancer, autoimmunities. It's not just about what you weigh and how you look. It's about the rest of your life, which you could be living with 3 or 4 drugs every day, or you could be living very healthy, no drugs at all and no diseases, which now is a rare occasion.
Very cool. All right, Valter. Well, if you were going to talk to all the people listening to this, all the people who are committing to exploring intermittent fasting, considering implementing this, integrating it into their life for at least let's call it a couple of months here to try it on, what would you want them to know or consider or think about before they tried on fasting for the first time? What would be your advice or your guidance that you wish everyone had before they really experimented with their first intermittent fasting diet?
Yeah, I would say number one is talk to the clinic, the foundation clinic, or your own. But make sure, if you pick your own, and the foundation is called Create Cures, and they can do a telemedicine. You can pick your own, but make sure they know about fasting, right? Don't pick a nutritionist that says, "Oh, I never done anything like this." And I mean, no means that they really study it, they spend a lot of time reading the scientific literature, et cetera, et cetera. So that's number one, right? That person can already, the nutritionist, the registered dietitian in the United States can already make a tremendous difference, and the cost is going to be whatever, $100 or something like that. So I think it's worth the $100. And yeah, then I think other than that is really pick something that is very safe for you first, right? First, do no harm. So 12 hours, 13 at the most, periodic fasting mimicking diet, maybe 3 times a year for the average healthy person. And yeah, those would be and then 16 hours, one day every week, and all of that. Probably not a good idea in general, but yeah, if you want to do it for 3 months and make some big changes because this encourages you to be in a different state, then do it. And still maybe have a RD, a registered dietitian, follow you, and then move to what I just mentioned.
Perfect. And Walter, for people who want to take a deeper look at your work, your research, what are the best places to find you online? You talked a little bit about Create Cures and your foundation and the book. So, what are the best places for people to look more deeply into your work and all the great things that you're putting out in the world?
Yeah, so the longevity diet book is out there, and you can get it everywhere. Then there's another book that's going to come out, I think, in September on cancer. So wait for that. And then yeah, the createcures.org foundation clinic in Los Angeles, but again, able to follow you anywhere you are. And those are the best. And then I think the foundation websites, we tend to have lots of the publications and stories. And so both Facebook, my Professor Valter Longo Facebook page, and I think there is also other social pages that my team put together, and then the foundation website itself, where you can, if you want to download some of the papers. And at some point, I think we also have some classes that the online classes that people can follow, and they're on the createcures.org website.
Perfect. And so, Walter, how about this? We'll close on just vision for the future. So everything goes right, your research keeps up. What impact does everything you're working on have on the world and collective health?
Well, I think that we have to keep demonstrating. So now we finish diabetes trials. It's looking very, very good. We finished on about 10 cancer clinical trials, and they're looking very promising. And yeah, we're just going to keep on helping clinicians all over the world run clinical trials. And then some of it will be positive, some of it may not work, and we'll see. But I think I really think that food should become part of the physician, registered dietitian, and people's toolkit, right, for health. And it doesn't
100%.
necessarily mean that the way you eat every day. It can also mean that food now becomes a medicine, and it becomes a medicine in a box that you do once in a while, just like you do any treatment. And but now, of course, it allows your body to fix itself rather than trying to interfere with the body normal processes, which is what most drugs do. Yeah, so this is really important. The body, I always say, if you cut yourself, that wound within a couple of weeks is repaired to perfection. Now, imagine if you try to biohack your way through repair without the natural repair. I mean, it probably take you 50 years, right, to match what's already done almost perfectly by the body. And yeah, so then we believe that the liver, the heart, the brain, all these systems have the same ability to do self-repair, but there is just very precise ways to get that done. And um, and I think some of the food and this medical food is probably one of the best ways to achieve that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Dr. Longo, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate this. We will include all of the links to visit the foundation, more of Valter's research. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And best of luck with everything that you're doing in the world.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much.